Welcome to the San Francisco Writers Conference podcast, a celebration of craft, commerce, and community. I'm your host, Matthew Felix, and I'm here today with Jeff Greenwald. Jeff is a photojournalist, author, and stage performer whose experiences in Asia have framed his style of travel writing. His 6 books include the best-selling Shopping for Buddhas, recently republished in a 25th anniversary edition, The Size of the World, for which he created the first international travel blog, and Snake Lake, a travel memoir set in Kathmandu, Nepal during the 1990 democracy revolution. Jeff's stories and essays have appeared in print and online publications worldwide, including Smithsonian, Afar, Outside, the New York Times, National Geographic-Adventure, and Wired. His critically acclaimed solo stage show, Strange Travel Suggestions, has played to sold-out houses since 2003. Jeff is also co-founder of Ethical Traveler, an international community dedicated to defending human rights and protecting the environment. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, thanks for having me, Matthew.
Thanks for being here. So you have a new book out, 108 Beloved Objects, which we're going to talk about in a bit. And that features a lot of the objects that you have acquired and the mementos you've acquired on your travels. But before we get to that, I want to talk about travel in general. When did you first get the travel bug?
Boy, I started getting the travel bug about the minute after I saw the film Lawrence of Arabia. That was a big influence on me. I don't know how old I was, maybe 14 or so, 15. And there were 2 films that really influenced me in terms of wanting to be a traveler. One of them was Lawrence of Arabia. I just loved the idea of those desert landscapes and the thought of just sort of having nothing between you and the horizon. But the other film that really made me want to get out of my town was 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it's funny how those 2 films sort of are similar. They both convey the sense of just an open, infinite vista. And I think growing up on Long Island in this sort of semi-urban, congested, everything always in your face community, the idea of sort of a limitless horizon really appealed to me.
Right.
I was also really drawn to visiting the American Southwest after seeing a book called Navajo Wildlands. I believe it was by Elliot Porter. Books.
So why travel? Just sort of philosophically, why do we travel?
Well, gosh, I didn't know.
I realize that could be 6 hours. But just kind of briefly, some thoughts on that.
I think anything that sort of gets you out of your comfort zone or changes your comfort zone or expands your comfort zone is really a valuable undertaking. It doesn't have to be travel, but in the case of travel, you've got something really, really that's immersively different. Everything you do when you travel, from where you wake up, the moment you wake up in the morning until the last thing you do in the day, is different than anything you've done before. And it challenges you and excites your curiosity and just kind of drives your imagination at every moment. You have opportunities that you never have in your normal, I'll call it your default life. And you can basically change who you are too. Like in my case, I was a very sort of, how would I say this without being too cruel on myself? I was sort of a very insulated, socially anxious person. But when I traveled, I found that I could change that persona and be very outgoing and just sort of come out of the cocoon that I felt that I was sort of living in. It's funny, another person who I talked to who felt the same way about what he did was Larry Harvey, the founder of Burning Man. And he confided in me in one of our interviews that he was a terrible introvert. But at Burning Man, he sort of was able to shed that persona and just engage with people in a way he really had never been able to do in his own default life. So I felt a sort of kinship with him on that.
Right. Especially at some place like Burning Man, where they've actually created a world in which to facilitate that, right? In which they're saying, leave everything behind and just come be who you really want to be and be somebody different or be your true self or whatever that might be for you during that week. Yeah, that's a great example.
I was at a panel once, I don't remember how many years ago, with Jan Morris and Michael Shapiro, and I think Isabel Allende was on the panel, I'm not sure. And we were asked, what's the most exotic place you've ever traveled to? And my answer was Burning Man, because of all the places I've been in the world, over my 40, 45-year career as a travel journalist, I've never been any place that challenged me and gave me as much new material to be curious about as being out on the Burning Man playa.
Right. And how many times have you gone? I know you've gone many times, but
I've been there 13 times.
13 times. Yeah. I've been once, which was just a couple years before COVID. I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. But I would definitely go again. I had a fantastic experience.
I'll bet you did.
I did. But one thing you say about to this question of, why do we travel? You say something on your website that I really liked, and I just want to ask you to speak to momentarily. Quote, travel and exploration brings more than a new awareness of ourselves. It shows us what it means to be human. What did you mean by that?
I think that this was something that really came across to me during my first trip to India. The first few days I was there, I'd taken a flight to Bombay from Egypt. This was in 1979. I was just terrified. I mentioned the word insular before. I was staying at the Red Shield YMCA hostel or something. And I just stayed in my room. I couldn't bear the thought of going outside because the assault of traffic and people and beggars and animals and noise was just altogether too much for me. And I felt like I was just trapped in this sort of identity of who I'd been in the United States. And then one day I sort of went outside and I had to walk to the corner cafe for something or store. And I just began looking at people and they looked back at me. Some of them greeted me with the traditional namaste that you get in South Asia. And in this kind of epiphanal moment, it's like I shed my spacesuit. I had felt like an alien, on an alien planet while I was in India. And it suddenly occurred to me that I was simply on planet Earth and that all these people were fellow Earthlings and that there was nothing to fear. There was nobody to be intimidated by. There was nothing here that I wouldn't find anywhere else on the planet. And I rediscovered the fact of what it meant to actually be a human being on the planet Earth. Mm-hmm. And everywhere I've traveled, I've been so inspired and delighted by these commonalities between people, the value of a smile, the reaction to a kind word, how people will deal with sincerity, how easy it is to offend them by mocking them or laughing. I mean, just how we're all so alike as a species in the most fundamental of ways. Right. And from that moment forth in India in 1979, I don't think I ever put myself above or below anyone else on Earth and really understood what it meant to be human.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a couple times, one thing you just said, you started kind of that anecdote with, you made eye contact with these people. Yeah. And sometimes something that strikes me when I'm traveling is, you and I both live in very urban areas, and I think we both love living where we live. And yet a lot of times when I'll go places where the pace is so much slower, I notice people are making eye contact, and that does bring me back sort of more into myself. And it does also highlight that connection with this is another human, and I appreciate being seen and seeing them. So I just wonder if that's part of that idea.
It's huge, Matthew. It's huge. It's like I go for a walk every morning here in Oakland, and I'm always astonished by how few people will make eye contact with you when you pass them. On the contrary, when I'm in the streets of, say, even a city like Kathmandu, Nepal, every single person you pass will make eye contact with you. And if the eye contact lasts longer than a half a second, they'll greet you. Exactly. They will acknowledge the fact that you are both human beings. And that is so precious to me. And it's funny, there was a test that was developed by this university about how people reacted to being with people of their own race as opposed to with people of color. And the test involved spontaneous reactions on their website. And I came out being more comfortable with people of color. And I think the only reason I really had that reaction on that test was because in places like Africa, in South Asia, in South America, I'm used to getting eye contact from people like that. I'm used to having my humanity acknowledged and having the opportunity to acknowledge their humanity. And I don't feel that so much even in a wonderful, diverse town like Oakland, California.
Right.
It's missing more than it is when I travel.
Right. So much more, so much more I want to talk. We could talk all about these themes for the next hour, but I have to change gears in the interest of time. And I want to just ask you about, in this, so you've been traveling, like you said, 40, 45 years, whatever, a few decades. On the surface, at least, it seems to me as if in this time of social media and mass tourism, where it's so much easier not only to learn about places, but to get to the places across the globe, right? A lot of places 10, 20 years ago that were out of reach are now much, much more accessible. And so do you think that sometimes, I guess maybe sometimes I wonder about, is there less of a sense of discovery and exploration today because of that? Or do we just need to do things differently? I mean, thoughts on kind of how that has or has not changed?
Well, discovery and exploration are still available for people with the courage and resources to do it. There's a lot of places in the world that are still very remote and still very beautiful and very uncrowded. But I think what's really missing from travel over the past, I don't know how many years, 5 to 10 years, has been the availability of real immersion in places that you visit. And this is a story that's bantered about a lot by people of my generation who traveled, in the 80s and 90s a lot, is that when I lived in Kathmandu, Nepal in 83 and 84, there was no way to stay connected to the place you'd come from. Mm-hmm. You could write letters and it would take a week or two for them to reach the destination, and then a week or two for you to be written back to you. Collected your mail at American Express, at Poste Restante. You had no choice but to make local connections, to really surrender to the place you were in, to eat the local food, to spend all day, every day engaging with local people. And I think that's really been lost, even for people like me who recognize how important immersion is. When I travel now, the temptation to be online, to share my pictures, to write daily dispatches, to answer texts on my iPhone, it's overwhelming. I mean, we're being conditioned as human beings to sort of abandon the sense of immersion anywhere else but in our own world. And I don't know if that's damaging to us, but it certainly takes a lot of the richness out of life.
Right. Because as we said earlier, part of what we gain from travel is being disconnected from our day to day. And now it's so much easier for our day to day to come right along with us, right? Which therefore gets in the way, or can get in the way, of that immersion that you're talking about, which is so important. And
well, as you well know, there's Wi-Fi connections right now all the way to the very summit of Everest.
And I didn't know that. I did not know that.
That's been true for almost 10 years.
Really?
So you have people trekking to the top of Everest, climbing to the top of Everest, and just doing selfies and putting them immediately online. Oh my God. I mean, it's on the one hand, that's great. That's a really cool thing to be able to do. On the other hand, you're on the top of fucking Mount Everest. Look around.
Totally taken out of the moment, right?
Be where you are. Be there now.
Right, be there now. Yeah, especially if you're on the top of Everest. Wow. So they must have set up internet specifically for that purpose. I mean, it doesn't just make it up to Everest because there happens to be, a router down the hill. They must have done that on purpose, or
the technical tendrils of that are beyond my pay grade. But
okay, all right.
I don't know how they did it, but they did it. And it enables faster rescues. There are positive aspects to it as well. I'm not denying that.
Well, that's part of the problem, right? Is that there are positive aspects to all of this. So it's hard to just wholesale say it's bad or it's good.
Exactly.
Okay, one last general travel question. I mean, I feel like I can't not ask this. Thoughts on, again, this is another hour-long question, but just high-level thoughts on the long-term effects of the pandemic on travel.
I'm not a travel industry expert, Matthew. A lot of people come to me with questions like that, and they're very hard to answer. I think that what we're going to find, there's a lot of countries in the developing world that rely on tourism and travel for a fairly sizable chunk of their GNP. And those places, are desperate to welcome back travelers. Places like Cambodia and Peru and so forth, Belize, are really going to try hard to clean up their act and get travelers back. And I think that within 4 to 6 months, I hope we're out of this sufficiently so that travel will resume. And like so many other things that we think will change forever, I don't think travel is going to change forever. I think we're going to get the same level of travel and the same kind of numbers in travel that we've always gotten. Some countries might take more of the route that Bhutan has gone for a long time, whereas they go for a more limited number of travelers
Right.
who visit at a higher cost.
Right. Right.
You know, rather than just being able to backpack through a place like Bhutan, you have to pay about $250 a day and be on one of their programs. You know, some countries might adapt that kind of model too, just to limit the amount of people who come and to draw more income out of it.
Right.
But the great sort of avalanche of, you know, quote unquote, eco resorts and sustainable resorts, and this new term, transformative resorts, you know, it's all kind of travel porn expressions. I think that those really benefit local people a lot, and they're going to keep building them. And if they keep building them, they're going to need people to stay in them.
Right.
So I think that numbers will be back pretty soon, within a year. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong. It could be another big pandemic, but barring that.
Right. Okay. Let's hope there's not another big pandemic. Although, of course, there could be, but let's hope there's not. But continuing with this theme of moving beyond the pandemic and starting to travel again, Ethical Travel, the organization which you co-founded, which I mentioned in the bio, recently announced 2021's 10 best post-pandemic destinations. And we're going to talk about those in a second. You actually just mentioned a couple. But first, though, for people who don't know, can you just tell us what Ethical Traveler is?
Yeah, Ethical Traveler is an organization, a nonprofit that I co-founded in 2003 with the idea of the fact that travelers are the world's largest unappreciated public action group. Is that the right term I'm looking for?
Sure.
Just as the Sierra Club sort of banded together people who love to hike, fish, and even hunt to protect the places that were important to them, I think the world community of travelers has the opportunity to band together to protect the places that are important, not only to us, but to the people whose lives we like to immerse ourselves in when we do make those visits. So the concept was an international community of travelers who would be empowered to change the world through the places they chose to go and through the actions they took when they were there. Voting with our wings. And, the whole thing about the Traveler was inspired in the mid-90s when Aung San Suu Kyi, who was then the imprisoned leader of Burma, asked travelers not to visit Burma while it was being held by a military junta. And I sort of hope to expand that feeling she had to encompass all oppressive countries, that travelers, should write to the governments of places like, I don't know, say
Turkmenistan,
or in one case, it's a long time since doing one of these campaigns. But for instance, Tasmania in Australia was having a big logging project. And we did a big letter writing campaign to the government there, the Ministry of Tourism, saying we have a choice of where we spend our tourist dollars. And if you keep cutting down all these trees, we're going to find somewhere else to go. We conducted campaigns like that in maybe 8 different countries nationwide. But that was a long time ago. And since 2003, internet petitions and actions have really overtaken letter writing campaigns.
Right.
Those are not as effective anymore. So the main thing we do now is as you mentioned, we publish a list every year of the 10 best places to visit in the developing world. Places that are spending their resources wisely on social welfare, on environmental protection, on human rights. Places that are basically doing the right thing, using the carrot instead of the stick, supporting places doing something good rather than trying to punish places that are doing the wrong thing.
Right. So you called your organization Ethical Traveler, not Ethical Tourist. Is there a difference between travel and tourism?
Yeah, I mean, I say in my stage show, there's this great line that let me see if I can remember it just off the cuff. A traveler sees what he or she sees, whereas a tourist sees what he or she has come to see.
Say that again. A traveler sees. Say that
I'm
again.
having problems because the pronouns here were not in the original quote.
That's fine. That's fine.
I'll just state it in the way it was written.
Okay.
A traveler sees what he sees. A tourist sees what he has come to see.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yes.
So it's an element of unpredictability, of the willingness to take strange travel suggestions, which was the name of my one-man show, that distinguishes a traveler from a tourist. Any tourist can become a traveler at any point, and vice versa. I mean, when I travel to Peru, I want to see Machu Picchu, I want to see the condors, but I'm also willing to be a traveler rather than a tourist and take those suggestions of like an invitation from somebody I meet on the street or a bus ride to a place I've never been before, and sort of break with the conventional wisdom and the mentality of the group and get out and do something
Right.
completely
Right.
different.
What about mass tourism? Is there any way for that to be ethical?
Not in a big mass. I think
Yeah.
when you get groups bigger than about 12 or 15, it becomes pretty unsupportable.
Yeah.
It's not very interesting for the travelers, travelers or tourists, in my opinion. But I think it's really hard to stay in smaller hotels, to travel more sustainably, to eat more sustainably when you have people in a large group with expectations, of a very, high level trip.
Right.
And it's hard to sell trips if they're not at a fairly high level.
Right. What about, and this is even an even more personal question, something that I think about, and I know most at least somewhat socially conscious travelers probably think about at this point. But is it even ethical at all to get on a plane to go overseas at this point, given the environmental consequences? I mean, I know we have carbon offsetting programs and things like that, but what are your thoughts on that? And ideally, if you could just make me feel okay about it, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, it's kind of a funny question to be asking on a day when William Shatner
That's true.
blasted into space on a 10-minute ride that probably burned as much carbon as, 500 airplane rides.
Yeah.
Yeah, people should limit their air travel. There's no question about that. I mean, there's no reason these days to travel so much for business or to do a lot of traveling that we used to think was essential economically. I think a lot of that can now be done on Zoom and through electronic social media. In terms of traveling to see other places and other cultures, that's a very, very tiny percentage of the carbon footprint on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
It comes to like, I don't know, it was sort of like 2 or 3% of all global pollution was air travel. And if we could cut that in half by limiting business travel, we'd be down to maybe 1.5 to 2%. I think that is sort of a cost benefit thing that we have to think about. I think it's worth it to be able to go to other countries, to have a personal impression of what people are experiencing in other parts of the world, to present yourself as an American, as a Canadian, as a person from any other country, visiting a host country and changing people's ideas about what people from your country are like. I mean, some of the most profound trips I've ever had have been to places that I thought I knew through the news. Cuba, Israel, Iran. These were all places that I had a set idea of what they were like. And then I went there and it was completely different. I'll never think of them the same way again. And this is an experience you cannot have without actually traveling to these places. I mean, you can watch Rick Steves on TV, you can watch old Anthony Bourdain, specials, but until you're actually there having your own experience, you don't really internalize that sense of unity with your fellow human beings on this planet. I think travel is a really great investment in that, even if there is a carbon footprint involved.
Right. I love that answer. Thank you for that. And implied in what you were just saying also is it goes both ways, right? So for example, the countries that you were just mentioning, just as you're learning about them and realizing how off your impressions might have been based on, the information that you had with which to form those impressions. I love going to some of those places and then just getting barraged with the questions, right? And
Yes.
getting to share our perspective and kind of help round out their impressions, because of course, in a lot of those countries that you just mentioned and so many others, they're getting such an imbalanced information about us and our society. So it's lovely how it goes both ways like that.
It is amazing some of the questions you get asked.
Yes.
In some of these other countries, and the things people will say to you. I just want to share this one anecdote. This little boy in the souk in the public market in Isfahan in Iran, just said, "How do you like Isfahan?" And I said, "I love Isfahan. It's beautiful. What do you think of your city?" And he said, "I think Isfahan is even more beautiful than Chicago."
I love that. Yes.
Random, comment coming out of nowhere.
Right. Right.
This is another point I want to make sure to make to you, while we still have a little time, is that, America has quite an ambivalent place in the minds of people all around the world. And if you say you're from America, people often react to you in a way of just they'll roll their eyes or they'll shake their head or they'll ask you some question that's very confrontational about America. But if you say, yes, I'm from Chicago, or I'm from San Francisco, or I'm from Baton Rouge, the reaction is completely different. People say, oh, I have a cousin in Baton Rouge. Oh, I love Chicago. I visited there with my niece. San Francisco, such a beautiful city. And it's this weird paradox that people abroad hate America often, but they love every part of America. And this is something, that I've never been able to quite figure out. They love each individual piece of it, but together as a monolithic whole, it is sort of offensive sometimes.
Yes, it's very paradoxical, but also understandable, right? Because it just depends on the level. If you're talking political versus socially versus if they have a connection, then they have a different understanding, and it's more personal versus the political, which is so impersonal.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you just said, it's all about connection, and that's why travel is so important.
Right.
Because travel is all about connection.
Right. So before we move on from Ethical Traveler, I do just want to quickly touch on, like we've talked about the fact that you have this annual contest. I just want to say that you, in normal years, this is from your website, you focus on 4 categories to determine the rankings and the awards: environmental protection, social welfare, human rights, and animal welfare.
Yeah.
The 2021 10 best post-pandemic destinations included Belize, Benin, Cabo Verde, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Jamaica, Mongolia, Nepal, the Gambia, and Uruguay. Now, you said in the announcement of these winners, you said, quote, "Our 2021 awards underscore the fact that despite the chaos wrought by COVID-19, we enter 2021 seeing rays of hope." So why are you hopeful?
Well, I'm hopeful because of the vaccine, first and foremost. That's making all the difference in the world in terms of a lot of these countries are concerned. I hope we can get it out to them quickly enough. I mean, there's an added thing to that. I'm even more encouraged by the fact we now have miraculously a malaria vaccine for the first time in our lifetimes. These countries that it's not really a contest because they don't know they're competing.
Right.
We just do a tremendous amount of research and find these countries. These are places that handled the pandemic in a way that was really great, kept their numbers really low, screened travelers in a really sensible, sustainable and accurate way, and did everything they could so that when the time came, when the vaccine was ready, they would be able to open their doors to travelers again. And I don't know what things are like now in a lot of these countries with the Delta variant and so forth. We haven't done research for this year's report, and we probably won't even do a report this year because things are so chaotic. We don't want to, make predictions or send anybody anywhere in particular. But I do have hope that these particular countries are going to come out of the pandemic and that whole pandemic era we've been in looking pretty good in terms of travel and tourism.
All right. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, all of that stuff.
Amen.
Let's move from travel in general to travel writing. When did you know that you wanted to be a travel writer? Or how did you get into it?
Okay. I was a visual artist before I became a writer. I did sculpture and graphic design. And I also did a little bit of journalism, just sort of satire and local journalism. In 1979, completely by accident and on a whim, I ended up visiting Kathmandu, Nepal, and it turned my mind inside out. I had no idea. There are cultures, this colorful people, this wonderful sights, this, just kind of transformative. And when I got back to the States in 1980, I applied for a fellowship from the Rotary Foundation to live in Nepal for a year and study and practice journalism there. And I was awarded that fellowship. And when I went there, I started writing for some newspapers and magazines that, about the places I was visiting and the trips I was taking. And that's sort of what launched me on my travel writing career.
Right.
Really 1983, 84. Though I do have to say that first trip in 1979, after Kathmandu, I went back via Thailand, and I ended up in Thailand just as the Cambodian Civil War was breaking out.
Mm-hmm.
And with the woman I was traveling with, a wonderful doctor named Wendy Warnham, we volunteered to help at the refugee camps on the Thai-Cambodian border. This was November 1979. When I got back to the States, I wrote a story about that experience, which was published in an independent newspaper called the Santa Barbara News and Review. It was an independent weekly, much like the Bay Guardian or the SF Weekly, R or AM. Mm-hmm. And the Santa Barbara News and Review published the story and asked me if I wanted to be their cultural and features editor. So I took that job, and that was kind of my entree into journalism. But my real entree into travel writing was 83, 84, when I lived in Kathmandu and traveled to Sri Lanka, to India, to a lot of the neighboring countries, and wrote stories from there.
Okay. So let's flash forward in time. Fast forward, actually, is what I was trying to say. Fast forward in time to today. What is, in a world where every other traveler's got a blog and a video blog half the time, or even more than half the time now, I guess, and all their pictures are going on Instagram every minute, like we just talked about. Even if you're on the top of Everest, you can Instagram. Where does the travel writer fit in today's sort of landscape?
I don't know.
Good answer. Good answer.
No, I can't answer that question. I do not blog. I do not vlog. I was the first person to do an international travel blog on the internet, and if I kept doing that year after year after year, I'd probably have 10 million Twitter followers now, but I'm not even on Twitter. I don't know, Matthew. I think that as the world becomes more kind of connected this way, stories that are more specific and surgical become more important and interesting. Most of the travel writing I see these days is about very, very specific encounters with certain kinds of people, with certain kinds of, craftspersons, with certain kinds of issues. And I don't think it really has to do so much with, oh my God, look at this great country, Peru, look at this fantastic place on, the Andes. They can't be stories that general. They have to be things that just really point at one single interest area and expose the passion and insight of the writer just on that one particular subject.
So less about destination pieces than maybe it was in the past, and more about personal, cultural, experiential.
Yeah, very much so. I think that I've done a few travel stories over the past couple of years, though I've mostly been working on my current book. But for instance, right before the pandemic started, in February of 2020, I was in Oaxaca, Mexico, and the story I was doing there was searching for a young woman who I met and interviewed when she was 8 years old in the early 90s. And I wanted to see what kind of woman she'd grown up into. So the story was about my search for this woman. I'd met her when she was 8. She'd now be in her early 30s, in the town of Oaxaca. So it's a very specific, very, kind of surgical look at finding somebody, a needle in a haystack in this one particular city. So stories that are that specific, that personal, I think are always going to be interesting, no matter where they're set.
Right. So a lot of people who haven't done travel writing or aren't travel writers yet seem to have this notion that, well, yeah, I'm going to become a travel writer because I want to get paid to travel. Who doesn't want to get paid to travel? I mean, how amazing would that be? But travel book sales are down. A lot of travel magazines have closed. So for a lot of the, especially airline magazines during COVID, there were at least a few, if not more, that folded. Is it possible to be a travel writer today and make a living exclusively from that? Or is it more something we kind of do on the side along with, because I'm thinking, because this is the Writers Conference podcast, I'm kind of thinking from the perspective of writers who might potentially want to become travel writers, just to give them a little bit of perspective, again, kind of the state of whether you maybe just throw travel writing into the mix of other stuff that you're doing, or whether you can really do that exclusively, given kind of what the marketplace is like these days.
Well, I think that deciding you want to make your living from being a travel writer these days is like saying, I want to make my living being an actor. Mm-hmm. There's a chance.
Right.
It can work. Some people do. There are a few openings there. They're very, very few, and they're very, very far between. And you really have to have something that no one else has. To make your living from travel writing, it's something that I have not done for years. I do not make my living as a travel writer. Most of the people I know who are travel writer it's a supplementary income. They teach, they edit, they do work like that on the side, which is in many ways more reliable and in a lot of other ways more respectful. I mean, working for people, even corporations as an editor, you can be sure you're going to get paid on time and your work will be respected. Often with travel stories, your work is deeply edited and you're not paid for months until the magazine comes out. That can be as long as a year after you write your story.
Really?
So, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like, for instance, I would do stories for my wonderful editor, Elizabeth Harriman at Westways. I would write the story in, say in February, and I would get paid when the story was accepted for publication and edited, maybe 4 to 6 months later. Some writers weren't paid until the story appeared in print. So yeah, there's no way to really make a real-time living as a travel journalist unless, until you say built up a big backlog of stories. So you're being paid for things you wrote a year ago and you're still generating work. You're going to be getting paid from a year from now. And the amount that people pay for stories has really dropped. I mean, even online, and it's not just travel journalism. I mean, I did a lot of writing for the Smithsonian website, and they pay half of what they paid 10 years ago.
Wow.
Back in the day when the internet was young and Salon was publishing Don George's Wanderlust travel column, travel section, he was paying $1,500 for an article. Now you're lucky to get $200 or $300 for a piece.
Yeah.
So you can't really make a living that way.
Yeah. I like your analogy of, comparing it to acting, right? I mean, if you are, Anthony Bourdain did really well as a travel writer, but I guess he started as a cook, but basically still same idea. Rick Steves has done really well. So, I mean, there are a few people who have massive success, but then the rest of us are maybe not going to have that level. So you might want to do some other things in addition to the travel writing, but thank you for that. But speaking of travel writing, you do have a new book, a new collection, like I mentioned in the beginning. So I want to talk about that now, 108 Beloved Objects. Can you give us the synopsis of what the book is about?
Well, the book is about the relationship we have with the objects that we surround ourselves with, our relationship with the material world in general. And also it's a book about letting go. So the idea I had 5 years ago was that I would take 108 objects in my life, because 108 is a kind of a very important sacred number in both Hinduism and Buddhism. So I'd find 108 objects that each had a specific story to tell. And I would do a book on these specific objects, and then I would let them go. I would give them away to anyone who read the book, who asked for that object. So it was a 5-year project. It was never meant to be a big published book. It was a book I wanted to design and put together myself. I saw it almost like an artist would see an art print that they're doing, as in a limited edition. So we did an edition of 108 of these books, signed and numbered, another 20 or so for reviewers or people like yourself who are doing, interviews about the book. And then we priced them at $108 each. And 95 of them are sold at this point, when you and I are speaking. But do you want to show the book? Or should I mean,
show the book. Show the book.
What the cover looks like.
It's a beautiful book. I mean, the design, it's wonderfully designed. It's just a beautiful book. The quality of the photos is fantastic. You obviously put a lot of love and care into the design and publication. Apropos
to today, each page is one object.
There you go. Yeah.
And one story. And the idea is sort of like that all we really want from our objects is their stories. The objects themselves have no real inherent value. They're just things that connect us to a place. Rolf Potts wrote a beautiful small book on this called Souvenirs, in which he talked about the history of souvenirs and of collecting things. And the whole point of them from ancient days to the present is just to sort of verify and cement our connection with the place. But if we have that story, if we record that story and have a really good digital image of that object, we can really give the object away. We really don't need it anymore. And that's what I learned, kind of doing this book, is that it's the stories, not the objects, that really define us.
Right. You say in the introduction to the book, you say, quote, like our genetic maps, objects decode the priorities and attachments that have shaped who we are. So I think that's another angle that's really interesting. One is realizing you don't have to hold on to the object to keep the story. That's one huge aspect of it. But another aspect seems to be realizing what these objects that you've selected to have in your intimate space, what they say about you and your choices and your priorities. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize also, Matthew, that not all the objects in my book are from my travels. Some of them are just sort of things that define me at a certain place in my life as young as the age of 16. And they do sort of map out the things that were important to me. One of the objects in the book that's being given away is the lapel insignia I had from my badge when I was a member of the Civil Air Patrol. There was a time in my life when I was 16 or 17 when the most important thing in life to me was to become an astronaut. And to do that, I would have to learn how to be a pilot. And I realized that the astronaut program at NASA was mostly hiring, Army and Navy pilots. So my idea was that I would apply to the Air Force Academy and be trained there. It's hard to, anyone who knows me now would find it hard to believe that I once applied to the Air Force Academy in Colorado. But even before applying there, I was part of the Civil Air Patrol. And so this insignia pin really defines a certain part of my life that, even though it's not a part of my life anymore, still is part of my genetic code, my personal genetic code. It's who I am. Space flight, science fiction, my awareness of what William Shatner did today, my interview with William Shatner 10 years ago for Smithsonian, all these things are still sort of, in the double helix, of who I am in my life.
Is there anything on that double helix that was sort of revealed as you were undertaking this project that you were surprised by, that you hadn't necessarily expected?
Well, that's kind of a surprise question.
Of course it is. Take your time.
I think it's been interesting to realize how hard it is to let some of these objects go and to try to tease out what that means. I mean, why is it hard to let the object go? And part of it is connected to how hard it is to let ourselves go. I mean, at my point in life, I'm seeing a lot of my friends sort of fall off the map, and I'm seeing my own sort of physical body, facing the perils of growing older. And during the 5 years I've been working on this book, that's a situation that's really changed in me. My body, my life, my ability to do things I used to love to do has really changed over these 5 years. And the sense that I'm really letting go of more than these objects has become more and more acute the longer I worked on this book. That's one thing that's really surprising. The other thing that's really surprising to me, if I can, is I never expected to love the book as much as I do.
Okay, interesting.
Now that it's finished and I hold it in my hands and I look through it with friends of mine who have copies, I realize how wonderfully the book in its entirety really says something about my life, and I think about people's lives in general. And I'm much happier with it than I thought I'd be at the outset. And as someone who started out as a visual artist, I know that there's not a lot of times when you set out to create an artwork that actually comes close to what you had intended it to be. I think it was Lillian Hellman who said, "Nothing you write is ever going to turn out the way you think it is if you hope to be any good." Well, this book turned out the way I hoped it would, and in this case, that's very good. And I'm very surprised by how close I feel to it.
I love that. What about so you're giving away 108 objects, but you're giving away everything except for 3 objects. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Wasn't there something about 3 that you're holding on to 3, or that the 3 would reveal what's most important?
I don't know about that. Was that me or was that Joseph Campbell?
Well, I think it was both, but here, I'm going to cheat and look at my notes here. I thought, hold on. Well, it doesn't matter if it's not the case.
I do have some objects I didn't put in the book because everything in the book is being let go of.
Okay.
There are some objects that I personally have, and they are still objects and they are still mine, that I'm not going to let go of, and that I'll leave to somebody, but they're not going to go out of my grasp until I'm away from this world.
And so, what distinguishes those objects from the ones that are in the book? Because the ones in the book were also difficult to let go of.
Yeah, these are objects, and I talk about one of them in the book, that not only have stories.
The ring, for example, was the ring one of them?
The ring is one of them. Yes, the ancient ring made of the Tokcha metal that I
Yeah.
found in Tibet. That's an object that has not only a story, but a certain kind of power. Some objects have a certain kind of power, and they're a power that not only sort of has a story to tell us, but it's a process of redefining the story of who we are. The Buddha I bought in writing the book Shopping for Buddhas is another object, that I'm not going to let go of, because it not only has a story behind it, but it helps redefine who I am every time I look at it. And that's very, very, important to me.
Well, and that reminds me of something else you said in this book. So that particular object, the Buddha, is still, you're still having an interaction with it, right? It's still
very, very much so. Yeah.
It's still having an influence and relevant to your day-to-day life. But one of the things you said in the book was that for a lot of the objects, they fade into the background and they sort of become invisible, even though at one point they were so important. Can you speak to that a little bit about how our relationship with these objects changes over time?
It's part of connected to the reason we need to travel in the first place. I think we buy these objects. Let's say I go to Rapa Nui, Easter Island, and buy a little statue of one of the Maui, and I have it on my mantle. For a few months, it'll really bring back the wonderful, very present memories of the people I met, the meals I ate, the things I saw, the hikes I took on Rapa Nui. But then, I sort of put it off to the side, I move it to another location, and it just becomes part of the wallpaper. It becomes part of my comfort zone, and its value as a reminder, a visceral reminder of those experiences I had, kind of diminishes. And that happens, one by one with all of these objects that we collect along our way. And then we go out, back into the world, to sort of leave and expand our comfort zone a little more. And we find other objects that are temporarily meaningful to us. But at my point in life, when I travel, I don't buy anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I just collect the stories and the friendships and the images. I don't really bother bringing back any material object anymore, because I know how quickly I'm going to become just used to it, and it's going to become kind of static in the background to me. It's going to be noise rather than signal.
Right. So what about the interactions you've had from people who have asked for some of these objects? Can you just tell us a little bit about what that's been like, and any whether poignant interactions or surprising interactions, or just kind of what that experience has been like?
Yeah, well, the book has only been out for about a month, and I've only gotten about 7 or 8 requests for objects from the book so far, but they've all been really, really wonderful, and they've all been really personal. One of the people, my dear friend James, who knows some of the challenges I've had, medically over the past few years, asked for the butter wick. There's butter lamp wicks. A bundle of butter lamp wicks from Nepal is one of the objects in the books. And he asked for that object so that he could go back to Nepal with the wicks and light candles for me. Mm-hmm. And that was a really, really incredible request. One of the small marble Ganesha statues, the elephant-headed Hindu deity, there's a small statue of Ganesh in the book. I picked that up when I was traveling with my mom through India in 2008. It was something that she bought for me there. And I'm letting it go because the story connected with it is more valuable than the object. So this woman who requested that object is the mother of one of my friends. And she really loved the idea of having something from the book, which was a gift that I'd gotten from my own mother. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Another friend of mine who's getting older wanted the dancing goddess statue, because that's a chapter about how our bodies, change with age. And he has just turned 50, had his first colonoscopy, and is coming face to face with how his own body is changing. And he wants that statue as a reminder of how, how all our bodies are sort of perfect in their own way.
I love that.
So people have their own stories that they share with me when they ask for these objects. That's a wonderful part of this art project. It's just, and I'm going to start putting those stories up on the 108objects.com blog as soon as I can figure out how.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right. I love that. Okay. So we are coming to near the end of our hour. So I want to wrap up with a few sort of craft related questions. Again, kind of keeping in mind for our conference listeners and viewers who might be interested in some of that. And the first question is about the fact that the book is $108. So that is a hefty price. Can you talk about why you decided to go with that? I mean, I understand the symbolism, 108, 108, 108, there's a lot of sort of almost numerology. There's a lot of numeric symbolism that's important to this project. So that I get. But can you speak a little bit to that hefty sum and kind of why you went that direction?
Sure. And by the way, I just want to point out that 108 is also the number of stitches on a baseball.
Yes.
Go Giant.
Go Giants.
So there's two main reasons. One is that, as I mentioned before, I don't see this as a book as much as an artist would view a limited edition set of art prints that are numbered 1 to 108 with some artist proofs thrown in. I see it as an art book. There are 108 of them signed by me and an artist whose artwork is included with every book. And I wanted to have that kind of gravitas in people's lives. I want them to feel like they're paying for an art object, not just for a book. It's in book form, but it is an object of art. The other reason I'm charging $108 for it is because the book cost over $12,000 to produce.
Really?
If I sell them each for $108, I'll come close to recouping my expenses.
Wow. One thing that because how many books have you sold so far? Because I know you're way up there.
As of our talk today, I've sold 95 to 108.
Right, 95 out of 108 of a book or a project that costs $108, which is really, really telling of how enthusiastic other people are about this project. And you say in the on your website, you say, quote, as an attempt to underwrite the project. So to underwrite the project, I am turning not to Patreon or GoFundMe, but to my community of friends, family, and longtime supporters. So a couple questions related to that. First off is, since it's sort of an underwriting sort of thing, will there be other formats, or will there be a paperback or something coming later, or is it really just about the 108 hardcovers?
That's a really interesting question. It's something I've really been thinking about. I have more than 108 copies of the book because, aside from the review copies and so forth, there are a number of damaged copies that were reprinted by the publisher. So I have books that are not in particularly great shape that I could sell for less, but I'm not going to do that right away, probably until late November, early December. I'm thinking of taking the book in its current form to different publishers and seeing if a paperback of it might be possible sometime next spring or fall, or doing a print-on-demand paperback next spring or next summer. Of course, a print-on-demand paperback is not going to have the quality of the hardback, which is printed on an offset print, press,
right.
And it's going to be a completely different experience for people who have it. But I love the book. I think people would really, get a lot from it, and I would like to see it out in the world. But oddly, the more I do it, the more, if I do a paperback edition, where it goes forward in that sort of edition, the more valuable the initial 108 will be.
Right. So one question along these lines that I was sort of leading up to as well is, we talk so much, and this is where the craft part of kind of this part comes in. We talk so much as authors, particularly for new authors, about platform, about how we develop ourselves and our presence as authors and sort of get our work out. Do you have, and so I don't think that I have 108 people who would pay $108 for one of my books. And so I think it really shows, as much as I would like to think that they would, but I think it really shows, again, what sort of a loyal following you have built up over the years. And so my question to you then related to platform and following is that just something that has sort of organically happened because you've been at this so long and you've done so many things, the stage shows, the journalism, ethical travel, you've done so much and met so many people? Is that something that's just happened over time? Or do you have advice that you would offer to newer writers insofar as how to do that, how to build up a following?
It's so funny you should say that, Matthew. I don't consider myself having a following. I mean, there's like 250 people following me on Instagram, about a couple thousand friends on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter. I think the first thing you said, it's been a long career of working in the arts, on the stage, leading trips, directing Ethical Traveler, being generous to other writers who have come to me for help, and my own books. I do have 9 books out right now. 2 of them were co-authored, one with Larry Harvey, another with my sort of longtime employer and partner in crime, Christine Marie Mason. And I just have a large network of people aware of me and my work.
Right.
And I think that's really where it comes from. I don't know how to build a large platform. I've never done it. I would love to know how. And on the other hand, I think 108 turned out to be the exact perfect number of books that I'll be able to sell
Sounds like it.
without running
Sounds
out
like
of
it.
friends.
Yeah, without running out of friends. Exactly. Okay, so one last thing related to, because you did take this on yourself and you did independently publish this, and you just mentioned the cost was something like $12,000.
Yeah.
For people who are going to independently publish their books, and I say independent because there's self-publishing, which is where you do it all yourself, but independent publishing, oftentimes it's much more complicated, right? You involved an artist and a photographer, and we bring in editors and cover designers. So indie publishing can be lots more than just doing it ourselves. And so any lessons though, because were all of your other books traditionally published, or at least most of them were, I think?
All of
right?
them except for Scratching the Surface, which was my collection of pre-published travel stories. I self-published, I think in 2002, because I wanted the experience of actually self-publishing a book, having complete control over the typeface, the design, everything in the book. All my other books were conventionally published, except the one with Larry Harvey, the Burning Man co-founder, is actually a free PDF on the Burning Man site. He and I did a book together called Out of Nothing, Conversations with Larry Harvey.
So what lessons did you learn from this process of this book, of independently doing this book, insofar as the publishing process itself? Any to-dos, any things to avoid, any just sort of high-level advice that you might offer?
Make sure you do a test copy before you approve the print run. That's probably the most important thing I've learned. The other thing I've learned really is don't settle for anything less than the best you can do. I mean, don't say, okay, this is good enough. If you run a test copy and you see some stuff in there that you'd like to change, but it's going to take more time or cost more money, go for it. You know, whatever you invest in making it better is going to have long-term value to you going forward. So don't be stingy. You know, as my friend Rob Brezhny, he's a syndicated astrologer, once told me, when you sell your soul to art, don't ask for a receipt.
That's good. That's a good one.
I don't know what it really means, but it seems to be applicable in this situation.
Yeah. I like that. When you sell your soul to art, don't ask for a receipt. Yeah, that resonates. That resonates. All right, Jeff, on that note, like I said, there's so much more that I would love to talk to you about, but I appreciate your time. And the book is beautiful. So how many, we said you sold 90 something. So there's
13 left. 13
left. So for those of you who might be interested, where can people go to find out more about the book and about you?
Well, if they're my Facebook friends, I've been doing little snippets from the book on my Facebook feed with pictures. Otherwise, they can email me, jeff@jeffgreenwald.com.
Okay. And then what are the URLs for you have a personal website and a 108 website. Do you want to?
Right. I haven't, my personal website it's like, I have not brought that up to date since
2018.
I went on Mexico, 2018.
Well, that's most of the stuff I was seeing there was 2018. Maybe there was something more recent.
I blogged from Oaxaca in 2020.
Okay. All right.
The 108objects.com is another place where you can buy and order the book.
Okay.
It's the number 108objects.com.
Okay. And then there's one more URL, which I will throw out. That's ethicaltraveler.org.
ORG, yes. Thank you.
ORG for people to find out more about that. All right, Jeff, fascinating project, fascinating book. Thanks for talking about travel and travel writing and ethical travel and of course 108 beloved objects. And we'll do it again sometime.
You're a great host, Matthew. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Well, you're a great guest. Thank you very much. I am Matthew Felix, and more about me at matthewfelix.com. For more about the San Francisco Writers Conference, including how to register for next year's in-person, fingers crossed, 2022 President's Day weekend conference, you can go to sfwriters.org and sign up now. Until next time, thanks for joining us.